in the spirit of togetherness, I'm really excited to introduce our next presenter, who is, in my opinion, one of the best facilitators on dialogue and togetherness. Philippa Hughes is a cultural strategist and social sculptor who designs art-field projects which connect people who would not normally interact. And she does this by creating space for meaningful, humanizing dialogue. One of her most recent projects is called Blueberries and Cherries, which invites politically diverse guests to share a meal and engage one another in conversation in order to really understand the things that influence political ideologies and to create empathy. So it's super appropriate that she's joined in conversation today by Dr. Elif, I'm gonna say your name, Gertidem, who is the founder of the Empathy Building Through Museums initiative. Elif is the chief curator and the co-chair of the world's very first summit on empathy and museums with the Dalai Lama, which took place in 2018. Hi, Philippa. Hi, Elif. Welcome.
Hello, are we together now? I'm very new to this.
We got you.
Yeah, I can see you. Okay.
Hey, how's everyone? I am Philippa Hughes, and I started a thing called Blueberries and Cherries. It didn't actually start off as a project, actually. It started off as me just wanting to understand why people voted for Donald Trump, basically. So I started inviting people over for dinner right after the 2016 election, in fact, 3 days after. And I just had Trump voters over to my house. I made them dinner and I asked them questions. And I didn't intend for it to become a project, but because I just kept doing it over and over the next couple of years, it kind of became a thing. And then I gave it a name. And I feel like when you give it a name, and I made a little website to post pictures, it kind of became official. Anyway, so two years after I started doing that, I organized an art show. I curated an art show called A Good American at Hyrick House, a little house museum down in DuPont Circle. And, oops, sorry, kitty. And I organized the show with 7 DC-based artists who answered the question, what does it mean to be a good American? And the reason why we chose that question was because Mr. Christian Hyrick actually was a German immigrant in the 1800s. And he built a very successful business, and he became the biggest business in DC other than the government. And even though he was giving thousands of people jobs and bringing a lot of revenue into the city, when World War I came around, his loyalty to America was questioned, and he was asked to make a loyalty pledge. And he basically said, F you, I'm a good American. And that was in 1918. And 100 years later, a lot of the things that were being said at that time are still being said today. And so this art show just felt particularly relevant to our current political climate. Anyway, so that show was so beautiful with so many amazing local DC artists. But in conjunction with that show, I organized a dinner with 50 people from across the political spectrum to have a conversation, to experience the art, talk to the artists who were all at the dinner, and then talk to each other. And it exceeded my expectations. And the cool thing was this guy came to the dinner from an organization called New American Economy. And that guy and I started talking about how could we take this kind of exhibition and conversation project across the country. And we did it. We found money. We started traveling all over the country. We curated art shows all over the country with local artists in each place, all answering the question, what does it mean to be American? We dropped the good part. So what does it mean to be American in your community? And then we organized dinners in every community. Again, experiencing art as a frame, as a tool into these conversations. And it just has been one of the most personally gratifying experiences that I've ever had. So I wanted to give you all that little framework because at the beginning of last year, when we were trying to figure out what to do with this project, which we call Looking for America, I met Elif. I met her at this, it was like this gathering of people to talk about one word, the word hubris. So I was like very intrigued by this. Anyway, she and I ended up in like the same little small group conversation. And I am not exaggerating when I say within 10 minutes of talking to her, she totally changed the course of how I was trying to think about this project and how to approach the project. Because really, what did I know? Like, I just was curious about people, and I just wanted to like talk to people. And I'm pretty good at organizing, and so I'm good at like getting people together, but I needed a framework. And so that's what Elif gave me. And so that's why I wanted to, why I invited her onto this presentation, because I think a lot of the things that she and I have talked about are just so relevant to how we use art as a tool for not only bringing people together, but actually strengthening the bonds between people. And so anyway, so that was a long way to introduce Elif, and also a long way to say that, you know, we could probably talk for a lot more than the 25 minutes we've been allotted. And so I'm just gonna throw this out there right now, is like, we really wanna continue this conversation. And so we'll come back around to that. Elif and I had a great talk yesterday about like how we're gonna continue all of this. Anyway, okay, so I want Elif to jump in and just talk a little bit about your initiative and empathy building through museums and through art.
Thank you, Philippa. Thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here. And so I'm the founder of the Empathy Building Through Museums initiative, which is a one-person organization that I do in addition to my day job. Basically, I'm already employed at another company, but this is my passion. What I believe in is that the most important thing in life for me personally is to be able to create in people around me and myself a worldview that is based on empathy and compassion, not only towards just people who look like us or may think the same things as us, but also people who we may never see in our lifetimes. Basically, all of humanity and the environment, including what most cultures consider, some cultures considers living and non-living beings in nature, including minerals, rocks, water, mountains, and everything. I believe in the oneness of everything. So but when you talk about a big concept like oneness, it is just not very, it may not be so accessible to people. So what I'm trying to do is to basically walk the steps back, and through my research and through my experiences and my own curiosity, I found out at the heart of this concept of compassion and for everything lies empathy, our ability to be able to connect to another. And we can talk about the science of empathy and how new it is, and it is still an evolving concept, which is very true, interesting, because empathy mostly has been discussed in Western scientific contexts. So I would be very interested in exploring it, other cultures, traditional cultures, indigenous cultures, how they see this concept in their daily lives. And I believe that this empathy is something that you cannot. There's no sort of a manual for learning empathy or developing your empathy muscle. It's an experience. It's an action, and only through experience we can really understand what empathy is or could be for us, and then so that we can also the similarities that we find within ourselves when looking internally, finding the same the positives or the negatives in others, therefore feeling more similar and close to each other.
You mentioned the science behind it, and I think that's, for me, was the most sort of validating thing that we talked about, because I had a very gut feeling about how we use art and curiosity, empathy, like how all those things tied together. It was just a gut feeling for me for a long time, because I tend to do a lot of things by gut instinct, like charging full ahead, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I should research a little bit. And so so one of the most powerful things that I learned from you was around the science of how empathy is created. And in particular, can you talk a little bit about awe and wonder? I mean, that's the thing that really stopped me in my tracks. And then I started like kind of down that rabbit hole. And so I want to tell you about some of the social science that I've declared myself an amateur social scientist now after I met you, because I've read everything you told me to read. I've talked to every social scientist in America who's done any research on this topic. So anyway, the science, I feel like I want to talk about the science behind it.
Well, that's awesome. You know, this I actually felt I don't have a science background. My background is history of Islamic arts and museums. But because I believe empathy, and it is the most crucial skill that we need to invest in developing in our world, I basically, just like you, I just started reading and talking to people and collecting, inspiration. But I knew that at the heart, that this has to have some sort of, scientific evidence so that we can better understand what this phenomena is. It's a human phenomena. And but it wasn't easy to bring together, the scientists, because we don't always talk the same language. Our terminologies are very different. But luckily, there were several scientists who came on board. And for my projects, my first book was called Fostering Empathy Through Museums. And the second book is called Designing for Empathy. And I had the privilege of working with, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, geologists, and really people from a variety of disciplines. But what it is basically, the empathy, is that, in 1990s, in a lab, they discovered that human brain, or actual monkey brain, and I forget the species name, but they are capable of mirroring another animal in the same room, even though, for example, one is eating grape and the other is not eating grape. The other one feels like as if she picked it up and is eating the grape. So they said, "Oh, well, what is this? We never experienced this thing on the brain." So they started looking into it, and there's actually a good book that just came out about the history of empathy. By Susan Lanzoni, and she literally explains everything and how this concept evolved over time in the scientific circles. What my learning out of that book was that, first of all, this is a very Western construct. When we talk about empathy, we shouldn't really generalize it, to all cultures. They probably have, similar constructs in their cultures, but it may be expressed differently. Expectations could be differently, and social norms around it could be differently. I'm jumping from subject to subject, but one of the organizations that I've had privilege of working with is the Exploratorium. It's a science-based science museum in San Francisco. And they basically coined the term hands-on exhibitions, that when we go to science museums or children's museums today, you expect to touch things, and there's a tactile experience, there's a game-like environment. They coined it. And what they have been working on, when I first started researching, they had social scientists and behavioral economists, all kinds of people on board, to look at why people share. It's called the science of sharing, this exhibition. And when I experienced it at a science museum, it literally changed my world, because at the beginning of our conversation, you said, she created this framework. That's what I do. I think my brain works best in that way. I like, conceptual frameworks and playing with them. But I never thought that, I hadn't experienced an actual experience that I could articulate. So until I arrived at the Exploratorium. So whenever we put science behind an experience, then our chances of, monitoring it for its future developments gets much greater.
Well, that's interesting because one thing that we talked about yesterday when we had our very long conversation was this idea of experience. I mean, I'm interested in creating experiences for people because again, at a very gut level, I think that it's really hard to learn some of the really deep-rooted lessons about life just by reading a book, like a workshop or a textbook. You have to experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've really struggled with that because it's really hard to create enough experiences for everybody to have. I've been organizing these dinners all over the country. Yeah. It's still for a very limited number of people. And so I've been really struggling with how do I create more, I just can't. And so how do we create more experiences? Not everybody's going to get to go to that exploratorium in Spain, right? I mean, yeah. It's just not going to happen.
In San Francisco, yeah.
San Francisco, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
It's a real struggle that I've been thinking a lot about lately. But I will add to that is that these Zoom conversations, I've been very reluctant to participate in Zoom conversations in terms of my work because I just don't feel, I'm really skeptical of how we build relationships via Zoom because there's this barrier right here. I can't touch you. And it's weird. And but as the pandemic keeps going, this week I finally started to realize, like, I think we're gonna be in this a lot longer than I thought. I was very resisted. And so I think we do need to find a way. And maybe there's something in this. I don't know what the answer is yet, but maybe there is something in this that we're gonna figure out.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a learning process. I think it's a part of our evolution, to be honest, to become better humans. and this, pandemic, both the exploratorium experience, that's sort of like this game-like environment where the goal is not really to teach anybody about the science of empathy or sharing or social psychology or anything like that. It is actually through a very subtle, experience. It allows you to turn inwards and look at yourself. And that's how I experienced it. And it was a really amazing opportunity to just like live it at that moment. There are only a few other examples like this around the world. There's highly immersive, like dialogue social enterprises in Germany. They have these experiences called dialogue in dark, dialogue in silence, dialogue with time. The common thing between these two experiences and the pandemic that we are living through right now is the experience of vulnerability. It is basically, the only difference is that although in a museum or in a museum environment, of course, you are more of in a safe place, right? It is a sort of, you're still living through it, but you know that you will get out of it in, let's say, half an hour, 40 minutes or whatever. And there's then, this dialogue part at the end. You sort of share your insights and people share their feelings, they're heard and everything. There's a closure. So this is what I'm trying to do, basically, trying to figure out what is it that makes us connect. And what is in Zoom that right. in these, dire, constraints that is allowing us to feel this way. So in my second book, Designing for Empathy, these are all, both books have chapters contributed by a variety of multidisciplinary people from museums and non-museums. I created this conceptual framework around 3 questions. The first of all is, what is the object of our empathy? Who are we trying to empathize with? We really need to ask some hard, philosophical questions. Who is the other? Because it will change in every context. The other will change. Or should we ask, is there an other? If there's no other, if this whole thing that we are living through is this one interconnected, whole, then what is it that we are trying to empathize with? Yeah. And then the second question is, what are the ingredients of empathy? what makes empathy really? You know, when we walk in the room, you know, when you're organizing those dinners, what is it? Is it the dialogue? Is it the proximity of people to each other? Is it the taste? It is the, you know, our senses. Is it the music playing in the background? It could be many of those things. But the thing is that these will change by context, and they're always around us. I think that we need to just get intentional in identifying and paying attention to what they might be, so that when we design experiences for this purpose, we can be intentionally picking and choosing, you know, which of the ingredients, which combination is best for this.
Yeah.
You know, like awe and wonder, for example, is a major. I skipped that completely. I just realized that.
I know. I'm going to interrupt you for a second, Elif. I'm really sorry, but I'm looking.
No, go ahead.
Nicole has only given us 25 minutes.
Oh my gosh, yes.
5 minutes left. And I really want to get to one big question that we had so many things planned, Nicole. So we're going to have to do this again. But Nancy on the chat just asked the question that is related to something we wanted to talk about, which was, you know, how are we going to use the art? How does art connect to empathy? How does the art get used as this tool? And so that is something that we've talked about, because, you know, in the dinners, we literally use art as the tool to help people connect. And we have to think about art as, in this context, we're using art as a tool and not as a sort of rarefied object to be observed from afar and to be, you know, adulated on a pedestal. No, it's a way for, you know, in this context, the art is used as a way to reflect upon yourself and to like think about who am I? Like, you know, the 3 basic questions of humanity. Who am I? And why am I here? Where am I going? And art can help us to explore those questions. And I think in the other, you know, an adjacent idea to that is this idea of curiosity. I mean, art in theory, and it is my theory, that it can really spark curiosity. And without curiosity, curiosity is like a basic fundamental building block of empathy. If we don't have curiosity, we can't have empathy for one another. And so when we as art people, as museums, like if we can kind of embrace those ideals, I think those spaces can become better empathy building spaces.
Absolutely. That's, I mean, not just, you know, art alone, but you need like a infrastructure, you know, like intentional design around it, right? I mean, you need a safe space. And when we talk about the safety, safe for whom exactly, right? I mean, there are so many communities, they are underrepresented, even not represented in some of the museums. So there's like, and when you sort of go on that path, it becomes an institutional empathy. Institutions start looking inwardly to see how they can better themselves. But basically, I think art, just like nature, it inspires awe and wonder in us. I think it makes us feel like we are connected to something greater than ourselves. And that has to do with scale of things. When we feel vulnerable, yet uniquely special, that's essential to this interconnected wholeness, then it is also very empowering, because it means that what I do, what I think, my actions matter.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I hate to open up this other can of worms. Nicole, you're right. We need a whole day, because one of the things that Elif and I wanted to talk about is, you know, what is the world we want to create? Like, we are in this moment of crisis. And when there have been other moments of crisis in our history, new worlds were created after the Great Depression, after World War II. I mean, it wasn't perfect. There were certainly problems. We still had systemic racism after World War II, but that's also when like when Social Security was founded, when the public artworks were founded, the WPA. I mean, we have a real opportunity here. How can we use art to create the world that we want?
I think just by doing what you are doing, that's what I was gonna say. this is basically, I think, all of these, these books, these experiences, dining experiences, arts experiences, you name it. These are, I think, we should look at them as prototypes. What works in them, what doesn't work, what can we learn, how can we move this forward, how can we make these experiences more wholesome, and I think this pandemic, the thing that it did to our world, just like those empathy building experiences that I shared earlier, is that they shattered our illusions also, right? I mean, we are, and this is the time, we are still vulnerable, of course, and it is not easy to, it's a very privileged thing for me to say, this is the time to design and, think about it, but this is what some of us must do. Those of us who have the privilege of safety and good health need to really pay attention what kind of world we want to create. What worked, what didn't work, let's get going, keep experimenting. There's no wrong way of doing it. We can only learn from our mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, that brings up this whole other issue too that I've been thinking a lot about, is that I've made a lot of mistakes over the last, 12 years of working in the DC art scene, art world, but I've learned a lot. But I think, a lot of times in our world, we're not allowed to make mistakes, or we're very, there's a lot of castigation around making mistakes. And that is one thing that I would like to see in our brave new world, is this idea that we should just try things. It's like, we have to try, because if we don't try, we end up in nihilism. That's where, that's where things have been sliding before this, is that's how we ended up with the current administration, is people not caring, believing that they don't matter, that their vote doesn't matter, that their actions don't matter. So how can we create a world in which our actions matter, the way we take care of each other matters? I know.
Yeah, it is actually. I have a theory about this. I would like to. I have been calling this a triple focus. I think we should have, in every action, every design, whatever we are working on, triple focus has been helping me. The first focus is inwardly, trying to understand myself. What am I made of, and how can I be better as a human being? The second focus is looking at outside, people around me, who happen to be most of the time people, in my town. So like, they are people who are in close proximity to me. But then the third focus is this oneness, this whole, the interconnectedness of our existence that should include. So maybe, in creation of content or these experiences, we can keep this question in mind, like how keep the triple focus in mind, perhaps, and we can talk more. I mean, this is maybe one of the things that we can talk about.
I like that idea, the triple focus, because it's like the triple bottom line. We give it like a business, air, and fund us to do more, because, it's not so official. This was amazing. I feel I think that, I kind of like to end on, I do feel like it's ending on a kind of a positive note. Like, we do have the power, for those of us who have the ability and the capacity, like, we have the power to do these things, to make change. But I want to kind of end on this note of like, how do we use art and as an effective tool? Because, we are here on Art Community Day. And I kind of throw that out as a challenge to everybody watching, and to us, to you and me at Leaf, is how do we better use art in that work of connectivity, human connection? Because that, at the end of the day, we can't survive without that. We literally cannot survive without other humans. And so we need that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this was awesome. This was so much fun. Thank you.